Hi, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining me on today's session. My name is Hubert Petka. I've been with RFI for 7 years, and in my current role, I lead our consumer digital and segment research globally. I'm here today to talk to you about digital NPS, particularly mobile banking NPS, and I'm hoping to give you some tips on how you can create a good mobile app experience for your customers. When we look at digital, we know that obviously digital has been thriving now for a number of years. And this acceleration in digital innovation, digital consumer space has obviously been accelerated by the pandemic itself. And when it comes to digital banking NPS, we know that this area is becoming increasingly important to consumers. We know that expectations of consumers as to what banks should be providing in this area have also been growing quite exponentially over the last couple of years. And one of the things we observed globally recently is that consumers increasingly compare the mobile banking app experience with the experience provided by different non-banking apps as well. So creating good user experience, ensuring that you have a robust functionality is becoming increasingly important in terms of both driving satisfaction with mobile banking app services, ensuring robust uptake, and also driving the healthy main-man relation with your customers as well. So when we look at our data, we can see that in Australia, for instance, the continuous development and tweaking of the apps over the last couple of years has really changed consumer perception and has caused a shift in mobile banking advocacy, with a number of different providers seeing quite substantial changes to the mobile banking app NPS. But before we move into that, I just wanted to share with you some data points on mobile app uptake in Australia. So as you can see from the data in front of us, the mobile banking app usage in the market has seen an uninterrupted growth since December 2019, growing from 40% of consumers who had been using it on a weekly basis back in December 2019 to 56% of the market in September 2021. And one thing that I think is important to note here is that despite this rapid proliferation of mobile banking usage, online banking continues to be used quite widely in the market. We did see that usage fluctuate more regularly between waves, meaning that perhaps consumers rely on the channel to a different extent throughout the year. But it's important to know that despite the growing usage and the growing adoption of mobile banking app services, online is still valued by many consumers. And when we look at this mobile app adoptions in Australia and compare it to some other markets, as you can see, it's developing markets that see generally high levels of mobile banking app adoption and mobile banking app engagement than developed Western nations. But when we look at Australia, and particularly when we compare it to some of the other developed Western nations, we can see that this level is actually higher. So first of all, as I mentioned a few seconds ago, 56% of Australians use mobile app on a weekly basis, which is higher than in places like France, Canada, UK, and US. We can also see that the overall adoption of apps is higher in Australia compared to its Western counterpart. So if you look at the overall adoption, it's around 3 in 4 consumers are using or having used mobile app services over the last 12 months. So although Australia measures up quite well, quite favorably for their uptake compared to some other Western nations, it's still the data that we have here. The data that we have here still indicates that around 1 in 4 consumers in Australia shun this channel altogether. So there's still some space to grow uptake of mobile app services in Australia even further, despite those already high adoption levels in the market. And when we look at NPS of the various providers in the market, so first of all, the overall market NPS stands at plus 38. And we know from our data that Australia actually compares quite favorably to a number of other Western markets for mobile app satisfaction, for experience, and for NPS. But when we look at this NPS over the last 6 months, we have seen it on a downward trajectory. And this indicates that perhaps there's something lacking in the market. But I think this is a better reflection of the fact that consumers' expectations in this area are growing often faster than providers are being able to keep up and innovate and improve their app offerings. And in terms of how different banks are comparing to one another, so one bank here, which I think is important to really single out in this comparison, is Westpac. So over the last 9 months, Westpac was heading in an opposite direction, but that of ever-increasing NPS. And we know that Westpac has been improving its app as well. So what Westpac did was that they, to an extent, revamped the app offering. They launched new payment capabilities, allowing consumers things like ability to drag and drop payment transactions, ability to make payments through Siri. Consumers using Westpac app are also able to personalize the app, set up Apple Pay with a single tap. So all those innovations and improvements that Westpac embarked on had a very good impact on its NPS. And as you can see here, that NPS for the bank has been moving upwards in over the last year in our data. And how do you provide a good mobile app experience to your customers? So a few things here that are really important. So when we look at what consumers expect from mobile apps, the priorities really lie in 3 key areas. So they want ease of use, so they want good user experience, and they want strong security features as well. So security aspects are really important when it comes to banking mobile devices. We know that the security or perception of inferior security offered by mobile apps is often the reason why consumers still prefer to entrust online banking services for certain tasks, for certain transactions. That security is really integral to improving customer perception of mobile apps, maybe more so even than the experience itself. And the third aspect here, also very important, is that of increased functionalities. So consumers want the apps to become ever more powerful. They want new functionalities, but they don't necessarily need or want something that's quite sophisticated. They want features that will improve and streamline the everyday banking. And we see that information, we see this reflected later on in the data itself. But the reason why we believe investing in mobile is so important is that obviously mobile app has been growing over the last couple of years. We saw a very clear and interrupted trend in terms of a number of consumers in Australia who rely on mobile apps for their banking on a weekly basis. And we also see in the data here that some 3/4 of consumers can actually envisage a future where they stop using online altogether. Currently, we know that around 2 in 5, around 60% of Australians actually still use both online and mobile, a combination of the two, for their banking. But among these consumers, among 3 in 5 in the market, 2 in 5, some 40%, believe that they will stop using online altogether in favor of mobile over the next 12 months. So that's why we believe that investing in mobile and creating a mobile-first experience for your customers is so important in this current environment. And when we look at those different aspects of mobile app experience, we can see that Australia actually measures up quite well across a range of them. The one thing, or the one area where Australia seems to fall short of other markets is across aspects related to innovation. So for instance, if you look at things like ability of the app to support consumers in their money management activities, Australia currently sees a 50% satisfaction score, which is lower. Ability to provide personalized advice on products as well is another area where that app experience seems to fall short of other markets. And when we look at pain points globally, they generally revolve around the lack of innovation the fact that consumers believe they can get a better user experience elsewhere. Often the fact, as I mentioned at the beginning, that consumers, I think, increasingly look at mobile banking apps and compare them to apps offered by non-banks, either different financial institutions, neobanks, fintechs, but increasingly they also compare their experience to apps in the different areas of their life as well. So perhaps some of the pain points that we see globally around lack of innovation and better user experience elsewhere are actually less acute in Australia. We could still see that around 3 in 10 or 1 in 4 consumers believe that the focus on innovation should be, or the innovation should be a higher focus on the agenda of financial institutions, and 1 in 4 believe that other apps offer a better experience compared to mobile banking apps. And so in terms of what's driving high NPS score in Australia, so I mentioned at the beginning that Australia currently sees an NPS of plus 38. So how you ensure that this NPS score is maintained and improved? And there are a few things here that are really important to do it. So first of all, maintaining good user experience. That's the convenience aspect, the speed of execution is really what underpins a good mobile experience, both in Australia and elsewhere in other markets. And the other aspect here is that of functionality. So consumers do want their financial institutions to keep upgrading, as they refer to it, the apps. They want them to keep introducing new features, but at the same time, they really want the app to be quite intuitive to use. So combining the two, I know that sometimes it's not an easy task if you're trying to add features, but at the same time make the app very easy, very intuitive to use. But those two components are really critical in terms of building a good mobile app experience for your consumers. And the security aspect. So I mentioned this early on, and it's not so much an aspect that would drive satisfaction, but consumers want to make sure that banks continue to invest in new security features as well. The banks continue to make sure that the money, the financial information is kept secure when using mobile banking apps. So that aspect of reassuring consumers is also very important. And a lot of the things that I just discussed in the context of Australia are also valid as well in the world. So in here, we are looking at global average, what's important to consumers when using mobile apps, and what are the key pain points of that experience. So I mentioned early on about the need to create a good user experience, because the key drivers of good mobile app experience actually revolve around things like ease of use, reliability of the platform. So making sure that all of the features work correctly, the app is always available. Consumers want easy and fast login process, and they also expect a fast execution of banking tasks on mobile apps. So that the streamlined experience is the streamlined factor here. It really comes through really strongly when it comes to building good mobile app experience. When we look at pain points, they generally revolve around functionality or access to information. So the two key things here, but also, they're quite aligned in terms of what we're seeing in Australia. So those two key pain points and immediate priorities in or globally are around functionality, with consumers wanting banks basically to keep developing functionality and keep offering a new tasks, and access to information consumers need as well. So they want to make sure that the information they seek, both in terms of the accounts, transactions, but also product offering is widely available through mobile apps. But when it comes to the functionality itself, I want to be very clear that having a higher number of features and functionalities offered through your mobile banking app does not necessarily result automatically in higher advocacy and higher, a better customer experience in this area. So the data that we have here looks at the number of features offered by different providers and the mobile banking app NPS. So what we can see here is that the banks that often have fewer features and fewer functionalities, often actually enjoy a better app experience. So we have the likes of ING here, with 24 features offered through its mobile banking app, and seeing an NPS score of plus 57, a very strong score on in app stores. Citi also is in a similar situation, so fewer functionalities, fewer features, but a very strong user experience reflected in its NPS and app and Play Store ratings. And that interplay between the two is also seen in a chart that we have here. So in here we just simply look at the number of features offered and the average Apple Pay App Store and Play Store rating, and you can see that particularly here for CBA. So in terms of functionality and the number of features available, I think and I believe they beat everyone else in the market with 35 different features. But as you can see, their score does not necessarily reflect that. And I think this brings me nicely to my other point that I wanted to really emphasize in this section, is that although consumers do want more features, they do want banks and financial institutions to innovate in this space. Innovation does not necessarily mean adding new and very sophisticated features. Many consumers would simply like the banks or financial institutions to simplify, streamline the day-to-day banking, and things that really appeal to consumers, both in Australia and globally, around things like ability to quick view balances on the platforms, improvements in transfers as well would resonate really well among many consumers, and ability to update personal information. And there are a few things that are more unique here to Australia. I think the viewing of scheduled payments is something that has a really strong appeal in Australia compared to other markets. But as you can see, that the appetite and the features that consumers really want to see in mobile apps are not necessarily very sophisticated. They're features that should, in the eyes of consumers, streamline that experience with mobile apps and make a management of the daily financial activities quicker and simpler for consumers to execute. So what features you should be focusing on? And as the data indicated on the earlier slide, focus on something that will make that banking for consumers easier, more streamlined, and focusing on a combination of basic and some advanced targeted features would really resonate well in this market. One aspect perhaps that we know in some markets works really well in the eyes of consumers is where financial institutions actually allow them to personalize or customize their mobile bank experience, being able to maybe alter slightly the layout of the platform to move certain features of those platforms to the front depending on the usage and wishes of the consumer. So if you're able to offer this personalization or features allowing consumers to customize the experience, that would generally also resonate really well in the market. But when we look at those general basic features and what's really important to consumers, the data that we have here looks at the correlation with the overall mobile banking app NPS. So one thing here that really stands out is the key quick view balances. So being able to view balances without the need to log into the platform. So that's one feature really streamlining that process for consumers that will really have a big impact on the overall mobile banking app NPS. In the second here, we have ability to block or lock cards as well. That's another one that, we know it's already offered by a number of institutions around the world, but there's a still very strong appetite for this, and that's something that consumers really see value in. And the third one here is the payment aspects, so real-time peer-to-peer payment solutions, something that will also resonate well among consumers. So the number one, number three, we had it on the earlier slide as well, when we say the key innovations that consumers really want to see is around streamlining the ability to view the transactions and balances, but also improvements and streamlining of the payment functionalities of the apps. When we move to slightly more advanced features, what we see here is that some consumers would like to see or be able to view an overview of all the places where the card details are stored, and so that's something that will have a big impact here on the perception of the apps for those consumers. And some of them will also like to be able to store and save receipts for different transactions, and set up their own push notifications and active alerts. So I think the third one here, perhaps relating again to this aspect of customization of apps, and really allowing consumers to decide in some way what they want the app to provide and to offer to them. So to summarize very quickly at the end, we can see that the proliferation of mobile banking and the growing reliance on the channel really underlines the importance of building a strong customer experience in this area, and making sure that you continue meeting growing expectations of your customers in this area. When we look at Australia and we compare the market in terms of both uptake and experience with apps, we can see that the market actually measures up really favorably against other markets. When it comes to the uptake of mobile apps, we saw it being higher in many developing nations, but when we compare Australia to other developed nations, the uptake of mobile apps, and as well as the mobile app NPS, perform really well and often better than in other Western counterparts. And in terms of the experience of maintaining good user experience and adding new functionalities, whilst obviously ensuring that consumers' information and money are kept secure and consumers are aware of the security features in place to that end, are really key to achieving NPS. So there's three key elements once again are security, good user experience, and functionalities. And I think combining the two to work really well with one another, so that of enhanced functionalities or ever growing functionality and a good user experience, intuitive use, will be really integral to ensuring that you meet customer expectations in this area. But when it comes to functionalities and improving functionality aspect, important to note that innovation isn't always about adding new, very sophisticated features. Many consumers simply want the banks to simplify their day-to-day banking, and they want them to offer things that basically will improve those basic journeys and basic tasks that consumers often perform via mobile banking platforms. So please bear that in mind, that that innovation functionality, it works best when it's targeted at simplifying and improving those simple journeys that consumers make on a day-to-day basis. That's it from me. I hope you found that informative, and thank you very much for joining us today.